They laughed because they thought she was invisible, but before the night was over, every person in that room would remember her name. Brianna Brooks froze for half a second as a burst of laughter rolled across the dining room like a wave. Crystal glasses shimmered beneath golden chandeliers. Soft jazz drifted through the air. The scent of grilled steak and expensive wine lingered above the polished marble floor. To most people, it looked like another perfect Friday night at one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. To Brianna, it felt like the longest shift of her life. Her tired feet ached inside shoes she had worn for nearly a year. Her black uniform was spotless despite the 12-hour day she had already worked. A small silver name tag rested against her chest as she balanced a tray filled with drinks for table 14. She moved carefully between crowded tables, offering the same warm smile she gave every customer. It was the smile her mother had taught her years ago, the smile that said dignity belonged to you even when the world tried to take it away. As she approached the large table near the center of the room, the laughter grew louder. 6 well-dressed guests occupied the booth. Expensive watches flashed beneath the lights. Designer handbags rested beside polished leather seats. Their conversation stopped the moment Brianna arrived. One woman looked her up and down before exchanging a smirk with her friends. Another guest pulled out his phone. Brianna recognized the expression immediately. She had seen it before. The look people wore when they had already decided who you were before you ever spoke. "About time," one man said as she placed a glass in front of him. "We were starting to think you got lost." More laughter followed. Brianna kept her smile steady. "I apologize for the wait, sir. Can I get anything else for your table?" "Actually," another woman said, leaning back in her chair, "you could try smiling more. You look exhausted." The table erupted again. Brianna felt heat rising in her cheeks. She knew they wanted a reaction. Some people came to restaurants for food. Others came looking for someone they believed was beneath them. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" she asked politely. The man holding the phone tilted it toward her. "Say something for the camera." Brianna blinked. "Excuse me." "Come on," he said. "Tell us how much they pay you to run around all night." A few nearby diners turned their heads. Some looked uncomfortable. Others simply watched. Nobody said a word. Brianna lowered her eyes and adjusted her grip on the tray. The room suddenly felt smaller. The laughter seemed louder. Yet across the restaurant, hidden behind a dark partition near the private dining section, a pair of cold gray eyes remained fixed on the scene. The man sitting there had barely touched his dinner. His black suit blended into the shadows. His posture never changed. While everyone else laughed, he remained completely silent. Adrian Kane watched every second unfold. The restaurant manager passed by his table and immediately looked away, nervous for reasons Brianna could not possibly understand. She had never seen Adrian before. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know why several employees seemed tense whenever they glanced toward the private section. All she knew was that another wave of laughter followed her as she turned away from table 14. Her shoulders remained straight. Her chin stayed high. But somewhere behind her, the silent man in black continued watching. And for the first time that evening, something in his expression changed. Brianna pushed through the swinging kitchen doors and finally allowed herself a slow breath. The noise of the dining room faded behind the stainless steel walls, but the sting of humiliation followed her like a shadow. Around her, cooks moved between sizzling grills and steaming pots, while servers hurried in and out carrying trays loaded with expensive meals. Nobody asked if she was all right. Nobody mentioned what had happened. In places like this, people learn to keep their heads down and protect their own jobs. Brianna understood that better than anyone. She set her tray on the counter and glanced at the small digital clock above the service station. It was already past 8:30. She still had more than 3 hours left in her shift. Her feet hurt. Her shoulders ached. Yet none of that worried her as much as the unopened text message waiting on her phone. During a brief moment between tables, she slipped the device from her apron pocket and looked at the screen. The message came from her younger brother, Caleb. Her expression softened immediately. Caleb was 17 years old, bright, funny, and stubborn enough to make every doctor in Chicago shake their head. He had spent most of the past year attending appointments, tests, and treatments that seemed to drain both his energy and their savings account. Despite everything, he still found ways to joke with her. The message read, "Do not forget to eat dinner this time." Brianna smiled. A second message followed. "And stop worrying. We are going to be okay." Her throat tightened. The tiny apartment they shared on the south side was nothing like the luxury surrounding her every night. The building was old. The elevator worked only when it felt like cooperating. The kitchen sink leaked. But it was home. Every extra shift Brianna worked helped keep the lights on. Every dollar mattered. She slipped the phone away and returned to the dining room. The golden light from the chandeliers washed across the room once more. Conversations floated through the air. Glasses clinked softly. At table 14, the group was still there. Laughing, drinking, acting as though another human being had simply been part of the evening's entertainment. Brianna kept walking. Her mother had once told her something during a difficult season of their lives. Never let cruelty decide who you become. The words stayed with her now. She greeted new customers with the same kindness. She refilled drinks with the same patience. She thanked people who barely looked at her. The choice was not weakness. It was strength. Across the restaurant, Adrian Kane remained seated behind the dark partition. Several times his eyes followed Brianna as she moved from table to table. He noticed details most people ignored. The way she checked her phone and smiled despite obvious exhaustion. The way she thanked the dishwasher who handed her clean plates. The way she treated every guest with respect, including the ones who did not deserve it. A manager approached Adrian's table and quietly asked whether everything was satisfactory. Adrian gave a short nod. The manager immediately left. The air around the private section felt strangely tense. Meanwhile, at table 14, one of the guests raised a phone again. Another burst of laughter followed. Brianna heard it. She kept walking. But somewhere in the room, a silent observer was beginning to see far more than a tired waitress carrying trays through a crowded restaurant. Brianna barely had time to collect herself before the dinner rush intensified. The restaurant glowed beneath warm amber lighting as more guests filled the tables. Expensive laughter mingled with the soft notes of a piano playing near the bar. Servers moved quickly between crowded aisles, balancing trays and smiling through exhaustion. Brianna returned to work as she always did, refusing to let the events of the evening show on her face. For nearly an hour, she managed to avoid table 14. Then the hostess approached her with an uneasy expression. "They are asking for you again," she said quietly. Brianna forced a polite smile and nodded. As she approached the table, she immediately noticed several phones resting openly on the white tablecloth. The group appeared entertained before she even arrived. One man leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "There she is," he announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. A few people glanced over. Brianna kept her posture straight. "How may I help you this evening?" she asked. The woman closest to the aisle smirked. "We need recommendations. You work here, right?" More laughter followed. Brianna patiently described several menu items. Each time she spoke, someone interrupted her. Each time she tried to remain professional, another joke followed. The situation might have ended there if not for the phone. The man sitting at the end of the booth suddenly lifted his device and pointed it directly at her. "Say that again," he said. "The part about the chef's special." Brianna blinked. "Sir, I would appreciate it if you did not record me." "Why?" he asked with a grin. "You are not famous." The group laughed. Again, a second phone appeared. Then a third. Brianna felt dozens of invisible eyes pressing against her from around the room. She had experienced rude customers before, but this felt different. Deliberate. Calculated. Designed to make her feel small. "Please stop recording," she repeated calmly. The woman nearest the window shook her head dramatically. "Listen to her. She thinks she gets to make the rules." Another round of laughter spread through the table. Several nearby guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Yet nobody intervened. Brianna's fingers tightened slightly around her order pad. She remembered her mother's words. "Never let cruelty change your heart." She took a slow breath and prepared to walk away. Then one of the men spoke again. "Wait. Do not leave yet. We are having fun." The sentence landed harder than any insult. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the certainty behind them. To him, she was not a person. She was entertainment. Brianna lowered her eyes for a moment and quietly excused herself. The laughter followed her across the dining room. At the service station, another server touched her shoulder sympathetically, but Brianna simply nodded and continued working. Across the restaurant, Adrian Kane had witnessed every second. The shadows concealed most of his expression, but his attention never wavered. The manager noticed where Adrian was looking and suddenly seemed nervous. Very nervous. Because unlike Brianna, the manager knew exactly who Adrian Kane was. And for the first time all evening, Adrian slowly set down his glass and glanced toward the security cameras mounted high above the dining room. The manager's pulse quickened as he followed Adrian Kane's gaze toward the dining room. For years, he had learned to read the moods of important clients. But Adrian was different. Most powerful men announced themselves. Adrian rarely needed to. His presence alone changed the atmosphere around him. The private section remained quiet while the rest of the restaurant buzzed with conversation. Candlelight reflected against crystal glasses. Servers moved carefully between tables. Yet beneath the polished elegance, tension was beginning to spread. Adrian sat motionless, one hand resting near his untouched drink. His gray eyes followed Brianna as she continued her work. She never complained. She never argued. Even after everything that had happened, she greeted each guest with patience and respect. That detail interested him more than the insults themselves. Most people revealed their character when life was easy. Brianna revealed hers when life was unfair. Near the kitchen entrance, she delivered a dessert tray to an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary. The woman smiled warmly and thanked her. Brianna's face brightened for the first time all evening. The smile lasted only a few seconds before she turned toward another table and returned to work. Adrian noticed that too. Across the room, table 14 continued attracting attention. The group seemed increasingly pleased with themselves. One guest replayed a video on his phone while the others laughed. Another pointed discreetly toward Brianna whenever she passed by. Several nearby diners looked uncomfortable, but nobody wanted to become involved. It was easier to watch than to intervene. Easier to stay silent. Adrian understood that reality better than most. The manager approached his table carefully. "Mr. Kane, is everything satisfactory this evening?" Adrian did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the dining room. The silence stretched several uncomfortable seconds. Finally, he spoke. "How long has she worked here?" The manager blinked. "Brianna?" Adrian nodded once. "Almost 2 years. Any complaints?" The manager swallowed. "Never. Customers love her. She covers extra shifts. She trains new staff. Honestly, she is one of the best employees we have." Adrian's expression remained unreadable. And yet nobody stopped this. The manager felt his stomach tighten. He glanced toward table 14. "We try not to create scenes." Adrian slowly turned his head. The look in his eyes made the manager wish he had chosen different words. "A scene already exists," Adrian said quietly. The manager had no response. The silence returned. Meanwhile, Brianna entered the service station to collect another order. She rubbed her tired hands together for a moment before lifting a heavy tray. The evening seemed endless. She reminded herself that Caleb would be waiting for her text message when she got home. That thought alone kept her moving forward. As she stepped back into the dining room, a sudden burst of laughter echoed once again from table 14. Several heads turned. Brianna froze briefly before continuing forward. She would not give them the reaction they wanted. She would not surrender her dignity. From the shadows of the private section, Adrian watched her take another step. Then another. Something cold settled behind his eyes. For most of the evening, he had remained an observer. But observers eventually make decisions. And somewhere deep inside the restaurant, a decision had just been made. The evening continued beneath a glow of gold and crystal as servers carried plates through the crowded dining room. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the dark glass windows, but inside, the atmosphere had begun to shift. Brianna moved from table to table with the same quiet determination that had carried her through countless difficult days. She refused to let the laughter define her night. She refused to let it define her. As she delivered a fresh pot of coffee to a corner booth, a sudden sound broke through the comfortable rhythm of the restaurant. A chair scraped sharply against the floor. Several guests turned at once. Near the center of the room, an elderly woman who had been dining alone appeared unsteady. Her hand reached toward the edge of the table as a glass tipped sideways. Water spilled across the white tablecloth. The woman looked disoriented. Conversation slowed. A few people stared. Nobody moved. Brianna reacted instantly. Without hesitation, she set down her tray and hurried across the room. "Ma'am, are you all right?" she asked gently. The woman blinked and tried to answer, but her voice sounded weak. Brianna knelt beside her chair and spoke calmly, reassuringly. She asked another server to bring water. She requested that someone call for the restaurant's on-site medical staff. Her voice remained steady despite the concern in her eyes. The entire room seemed to pause as she focused completely on the frightened woman. Nothing else mattered. Not the humiliation. Not the phones. Not the people who had spent the evening mocking her. For those few moments, Brianna saw only someone who needed help. The elderly woman slowly relaxed as Brianna held her hand and spoke softly. "You are okay. Take a slow breath. We are right here with you." The fear in the woman's face gradually faded. Several nearby diners watched with new expressions. Some looked impressed. Others looked ashamed. At table 14, the laughter had finally stopped. The group sat quietly, observing the scene they had never expected to witness. Across the restaurant, Adrian Kane remained seated, but something behind his eyes changed. He had spent years evaluating people, business partners, rivals, employees. He understood ambition. He understood power. Yet what he saw now was something rarer. Brianna had every reason to think about herself. Instead, she had chosen compassion. The elderly woman eventually smiled weakly and squeezed Brianna's hand. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. Brianna returned the smile. "Of course, ma'am." The room slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed. Glasses clinked once more. But Adrian continued watching. He noticed how Brianna quietly cleaned the spilled water herself before returning to work. He noticed that she never looked around for praise. She never tried to draw attention to what she had done. To her, kindness was not a performance. It was simply who she was. Near the private section, the manager glanced nervously toward Adrian again. The expression on Adrian's face revealed almost nothing. Almost. Because beneath the calm exterior, a decision that had begun forming earlier was becoming impossible to ignore. And somewhere behind the polished elegance of the restaurant, the people who believed they controlled the evening were about to discover that they had misunderstood the situation from the very beginning. The restaurant settled into an uneasy rhythm after the incident with the elderly woman, but something invisible had changed. Guests continued eating. Waiters continued moving between tables. The piano continued playing softly in the background. Yet beneath the polished surface, tension lingered like a storm gathering beyond the horizon. Brianna returned to work as if nothing had happened. She cleared plates, refilled glasses, and thanked customers with the same kindness she had shown all evening. Her exhaustion was beginning to catch up with her, but she refused to let it show. Then it happened again. As she passed table 14 carrying a tray of desserts, one of the guests deliberately raised his phone and pointed it toward her face. Another laughed. A woman at the table whispered something that triggered another round of amusement. The sound echoed farther than before. Several nearby diners stopped talking. Brianna felt every eye in the room turned toward her. For a brief moment, she considered walking away. Instead, she took a slow breath and continued forward. Her hands remained steady. Her expression remained calm. The group seemed disappointed that they had failed to provoke the reaction they wanted. One man shook his head dramatically. "Look at that," he said loudly. "She does not even care anymore." More laughter followed. This time, however, the laughter did not last. A chair moved. The sound was quiet, almost insignificant. Yet somehow it cut through the entire dining room. Conversations faded. Heads turned. Even the piano player missed a note. Adrian Kane had stood up. The private section suddenly felt very far away and very close at the same time. Every employee who recognized him immediately straightened. The manager's face drained of color. Adrian adjusted the sleeve of his black jacket and took a single step forward. Then another. His expression revealed nothing. No anger. No excitement. No emotion at all. Somehow that made him even more intimidating. Brianna looked up in surprise as he approached. She had never spoken to him before. She did not know his name. She only knew that the atmosphere around him felt different. Heavy. Controlled. Unavoidable. Adrian stopped beside table 14 and looked at the group in silence. Nobody laughed now. Nobody seemed eager to speak. The phone slowly disappeared beneath the table. The room became so quiet that the faint hum of the air conditioning could be heard overhead. Adrian's gaze moved from one face to the next. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, low, and precise. "Who gave you permission to treat my employee like that?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Several guests blinked in confusion. Others exchanged nervous glances. Brianna froze. "My employee." The words echoed inside her mind. Around the restaurant, employees stared openly. Customers whispered to one another. The manager looked as though he wanted to disappear. One of the men at the table forced an awkward laugh. "Sir, we were only joking." Adrian's eyes never left him. "No," he said quietly. "You were making a choice." The silence that followed felt endless. And for the first time that evening, the people who had spent hours believing they controlled the room realized they no longer did. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The restaurant remained frozen beneath the glow of chandeliers and candlelight. Every guest seemed to understand that something important was happening. Adrian Kane stood beside the table with the calm confidence of a man who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. The group that had spent the evening laughing now avoided eye contact. One woman stared down at her glass. Another suddenly became interested in her phone. The man who had claimed it was all a joke forced an uneasy smile that quickly disappeared. Adrian glanced toward the manager. "Close the main entrance for 10 minutes, he said quietly. The manager nodded immediately. No questions. No hesitation. Several customers exchanged confused looks. Brianna stood near the service station, completely stunned. She still did not understand why this man was defending her. She certainly did not understand why every employee seemed terrified of disappointing him. Adrian turned toward the wall near the hostess stand, where several security monitors displayed live camera feeds from around the restaurant. "Pull the recordings from tonight," he said. The manager hurried away. Within moments, one of the screens switched from live footage to video playback. The room grew even quieter. Images from earlier in the evening appeared on the monitor. There was Brianna carrying trays. Brianna greeting customers. Brianna doing her job. Then the recordings showed the behavior of Table 14. The phones. The laughter. The mocking gestures. The attempts to embarrass her. Nobody needed commentary. The footage spoke for itself. A wave of discomfort spread across the room. Some diners looked away. Others shook their heads. The elderly woman Brianna had helped earlier watched the screen with visible disappointment. Adrian remained silent until the final clip ended. Then he looked at the group. "Do you know what interests me most?" he asked. Nobody answered. "It is not that you chose cruelty." His voice remained calm. "People make disappointing choices every day." He paused. "It is that you felt comfortable doing it in public." The words landed harder than any accusation. The man nearest the aisle swallowed nervously. "We did not mean any harm." Adrian studied him for a moment. Intent does not erase behavior. The room fell silent again. Then Adrian turned toward Brianna. For the first time all evening, every eye followed his gaze. Brianna felt her heart racing. She was not used to attention. She certainly was not used to an entire restaurant watching her. Adrian spoke gently. "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 2 years, sir," she answered. "And how many shifts have you covered for others?" Brianna blinked. "A lot." A faint smile touched the face of an older server nearby. Everyone knew the answer. Brianna covered shifts whenever someone needed help. Adrian nodded once. "That is what I thought." He looked around the room. Character is revealed when nobody is keeping score. The silence that followed felt different now. Not tense. Reflective. For the first time all evening, the people who had laughed seemed to understand that the story was no longer about them. It was about the woman they had failed to see. The silence lingered long after Adrian's words faded. Nobody seemed eager to move. Nobody seemed eager to speak. The restaurant that had felt loud and crowded only minutes earlier now felt strangely small beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Adrian stood calmly beside the table while the group avoided his gaze. Then he looked toward the manager. "There is one more thing." The manager immediately straightened. "Yes, sir." Adrian glanced across the room until his eyes found Brianna once more. She remained near the service station, still trying to process everything that had happened. "Bring me the records from tonight's charity partnership event," Adrian said. The manager looked confused for a moment before understanding. Right away, several employees exchanged puzzled glances. Guests whispered quietly among themselves. Within minutes, the manager returned carrying a tablet. Adrian reviewed the information in silence. His expression never changed. Finally, he handed the device back. "All proceeds from tonight's event will be redirected." A murmur swept through the room. One of the diners frowned. "Redirected where?" Adrian turned toward Brianna. "To the medical fund for her brother." The entire restaurant froze. Brianna stared at him, certain she had heard wrong. "My brother?" she whispered. Adrian nodded. Caleb Brooks. Her breath caught. She had never mentioned Caleb to him. She had never even spoken to him before tonight. Adrian continued calmly. I ask questions. People who work hard deserve to be seen. Brianna felt her eyes fill with emotion. Around the room, employees looked stunned. Some placed their hands over their mouths. Others simply stared. The elderly woman Brianna had helped earlier smiled through tears. Adrian's attention shifted briefly toward the group at table 14. You spent the evening deciding what someone was worth based on what you could see. His voice remained measured. I prefer to look deeper. Nobody responded. There was nothing left to say. The lesson had already landed. The manager cleared his throat and spoke softly. Sir, that amount is substantial. Adrian nodded once. Good. More silence followed. Then something unexpected happened. Several customers began applauding. At first it was only a few people. Then more joined. Soon the entire dining room echoed with applause. Not for Adrian. For Brianna. For the woman who had spent the entire evening serving others. While carrying burdens nobody could see, Brianna lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by the attention. She had come to work expecting another exhausting shift. She had never imagined standing in the center of a room filled with strangers who finally understood her value. Adrian watched quietly from a distance. The applause continued for several seconds before gradually fading. The atmosphere felt different now. Lighter. Warmer. Human. Yet Adrian's expression suggested he was not finished. Because while the room believed they had just witnessed the most surprising moment of the evening, Adrian Kane was already preparing to reveal a truth that would change Brianna's future far beyond a single night. 3 months later, the restaurant looked the same from the outside, but inside, everything felt different. The chandeliers still cast golden light across the dining room. The piano still played softly near the bar. Guests still arrived dressed in expensive suits and elegant dresses. Yet one detail immediately caught the attention of anyone who walked through the front doors. A framed plaque hung beside the hostess stand. The words were simple. Respect is not optional. Employees passed it every day. Customers read it as they entered. And nobody forgot it. Brianna Brooks certainly never did. She stood near the center of the dining room reviewing training notes with 2 new employees. Confidence had replaced the uncertainty she once carried. The long hours were still there. The hard work had not disappeared, but now she supervised staff development across several locations within the company. People listened when she spoke. More importantly, they respected her. Across town, Caleb's health had improved dramatically. The financial burden that once kept Brianna awake at night no longer controlled every decision she made. For the first time in years, she could plan for a future instead of simply surviving the present. On a quiet Thursday evening, the front doors opened and a familiar figure stepped inside. Conversations continued. Glasses clinked softly. Most guests had no idea who had entered the room. The employees did. Adrian Kane walked through the restaurant with the same calm presence he always carried. Nothing about him demanded attention, yet attention followed him anyway. Several staff members greeted him respectfully. Adrian acknowledged them with a nod before continuing deeper into the dining room. Brianna noticed him almost immediately. Their eyes met from across the room. For a brief moment, neither spoke. They did not need to. Some moments were larger than words. Adrian approached the plaque beside the hostess stand and studied it quietly. A faint smile touched his face. Good choice, he said. Brianna laughed softly. It seemed appropriate. Adrian nodded. It does. Silence settled comfortably between them. Not the uncomfortable silence of strangers. The silence of people who understood something important about each other. Brianna glanced around the restaurant. New employees worked confidently. Guests enjoyed their meals. The atmosphere felt warm and welcoming. You changed this place, Adrian said. Brianna shook her head. No. People changed when they decided to pay attention. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then he gave a single approving nod. It was not the kind of gesture most people would notice. But to Brianna, it meant more than any speech ever could. Nearby, one of the new servers helped an elderly customer with her chair before returning to work. Another employee rushed to assist a family carrying a stroller. Small acts. Ordinary acts. The kind that often go unnoticed. Brianna smiled as she watched them. Because now she understood something she had spent years learning. Dignity is not protected by grand gestures alone. It lives inside everyday choices. Adrian turned toward the exit. Before leaving, He paused and looked back once more. The restaurant was full of conversation, laughter, and life. This time, it was the right kind of laughter. The kind that brought people together rather than pushed them apart. Brianna returned to her work. Adrian stepped into the evening. And somewhere between the golden light of the dining room and the quiet streets beyond the windows, everyone who had witnessed that journey remembered a simple truth. Respect costs nothing, but it can change everything. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.